Hello, my name is Eric, and I like to look at life from a philosophical lens. Uh, Life includes not only our personal lives, but current issues and really just about everything. Socrates once famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and I seem to kind of naturally agree. Well, today we're going to examine something that seems to be of a lot of controversial interest to a lot of people, and that's gender. I think both the left wing and the right wing here in the Western world are both kind of wrong about it. Now, that being said, I think both contain elements of being correct about it as well. So they're both kind of partially right, partially wrong. They get some parts right, some parts wrong. And I want to address it. I want to point out where they're getting things right and where each side is not recognizing the correctness of the other side, and therefore is getting some things wrong. Now, I addressed some of these. I addressed some of this in my video last night, which was titled "Talking About Nihilism on My 40th Birthday." And given the length of the video, it turned out a lot longer than I thought it'd be. I wound up talking about a little more than just nihilism. I talked about, the gender roles and how the left and right are both wrong about it. I talked about um, I told the story of how I lost my childhood religion, which I love telling that story. It's hilarious. But but I thought this topic would do well as a separate video because it generates so much interest from people, and people might not want to go through an hour and 45-minute video just to find something like this. So here it is. Now I'm going to talk about the left wing first. This is because I think the left wing position is a little easier to address. It's a little more straightforward. The right wing position, I'm in greater danger of strawmanning the position, and so I have to be a little more careful, a little more nuanced. And plus, it requires a little bit of explanation, a little bit of background in order for me to say why the right wing is not quite correct either. So, so let's start with the left wing. And the left wing, so the way they approach gender, they seem to have two ways of approaching it. And they sort of get mixed and matched a lot since it's all one side. It's one ideology, the left. Uh, but I think these 2 points need to be addressed separately because they're not quite the same point. The first of these points, I'm going to spend less time on, and it's the idea that gender is like the central organizing principle surrounding gender is power, particularly male power over the female. And um, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I don't really find it all that interesting of a topic, to be honest, but also because so much has already been said. You can find video after video of left wing people saying that this is the case, right wing people opposing it. Um, like this point has been just addressed ad nauseum, and so I don't feel like I have a ton to offer to the topic. It's just to me it seems just obviously incorrect that gender's central organizing principle is power. Now I don't want to go so far as to say that power plays no role in the organization of gender. Power certainly plays at least some role in the organizing of society as a whole, and so you would think, at least as a second order effect, if not directly, it would then affect how we organize gender roles. But I think it's obviously incorrect to say that's the central organizing principle. There's a lot of counterfactuals that strongly suggest this is not the case. For example, men are something like 95% of combat deaths. If women were so expendable and were some kind of um, slave class or something of that sort, why are we not sending them to die in war? You know, I mean, not a lot of there's not a lot of men dying in war nowadays, but uh, usually these arguments spill into the historical. We're you know we point to the evidence of history, or the left wing will point to the evidence of history to argue that men have always been dominant over women, but it's men who go to war to die. It, like it's like that's such a strong counterfactual. It's hard hard to say that society is organized solely for the benefit of men. Like come on. Another is that men pay the majority of taxes while women reap the majority of government benefits. And I know the counterpoint to this is, well, men earn more than women, wage gap, all that. And well, I'm sorry, but the wage gap has been thoroughly debunked over and over and over. Um, there's good reason that men get paid more, and that men work more hours. They tend to work in industries that are much more scalable, have much more demand. Um, Men work more overtime. These points have been just addressed, like I said, ad nauseum, over and over and over. Um, and so I really don't want to spend too much time on this because that whole debate is just so worn out. So I'm going to just go on to the second point. The second point, which I find a little more interesting, is that the left often tends to treat gender as something arbitrary. And this comes from a mistake in thinking, and the right makes the same mistake in thinking. Okay, they just wind up rejecting the premise, whereas the left wing accepts the premise. But the mistake in thinking is that if gender roles are socially constructed, like they're human made things, well then they're just arbitrary. We just made them up, and that's not the case. And this is kind of where both the left and the right wing both get things wrong. Because, like I said, the right wing just winds up rejecting the premise. They wind up saying, they wind up accepting the material conditional. In philosophy, we call these kinds of if-then statements material conditionals. You're saying, if this is true, then this other thing must be true also. Well, both the left and the right wing seem to both agree that if gender is socially constructed, then it is also arbitrary. They both treat this statement as true. Maybe some right wingers don't believe this hypothetical is true. Maybe some left wingers don't. I'm not sure. But by and large, they tend to treat it as if it's true. Now, what does this mean? It means that if humans have some role in defining gender and defining the roles that the two genders play, then human beings are just allowed to make up just about anything about it. I mean, it's already made up by humans, so it doesn't. So that means it's arbitrary, right? That means we can make up anything. We can say anything about gender, and I'm here to say that no, that's not the case. Uh, I I think the hypothetical is incorrect, and uh, the left wing, what they wind up doing is they wind up accepting the hypothetical and accepting the premise that's contained within it. So they wind up accepting that if gender roles are socially constructed, then they're arbitrary. Gender roles are socially constructed, and therefore they are arbitrary. Like that's a pretty straightforward syllogism, and that is, uh, I think, the sort of thinking that the left wing generally engages in on this topic. And I think it's incorrect. I think it's incorrect, not because of the second premise, which is where the right wing is going to wind up disagreeing, but I think it's incorrect because of the first premise. I don't think it's true that just because social roles are socially constructed that they are therefore arbitrary. I think there are definitely organizing principles that highly inform how we assign gender roles. One of those organizing principles is most certainly biology. I think it's pretty common sense that men, by and large, are physically stronger than women. And already we have an organizing principle. What this means is that the physical jobs within society, or I should say, the most physical jobs within society, are generally going to be done by men. Uh, Women are also the carriers of children. They physically carry children, within their bodies for 9 months, and then after a baby is born, it's generally women who, take care of that child and carry the child with them. Uh, this is because of more organizing principles of biology. Like men do most of the war making, most of the defense of the culture, society, tribe, or whatever unit that they are defending, um, because of their physical strength, but also because women do spend considerable lengths of time pregnant, during which time they are vulnerable. But also, women wind up doing a lot of the primary child watching, or keeping the children around them, making sure the children are safe, uh, for a lot of the same reason, because children need to be kept safe. They're vulnerable. They tend to be small and weak and dumb. Maybe dumb isn't the right word. They don't know a lot about the world yet. They don't always know what's dangerous and what's not. They don't always know what smart decisions to make. So women wind up keeping the children because children need to be kept in a safe place, much the same way as women do. So it is the men who tend to go out and defend the tribe against other men from other tribes, as well as wild animals and whatnot. More back in the day, they used to do that, but gender roles certainly had biology and the needs of survival as an organizing principle. Now, um, I think the left is correct in saying, though, that there definitely is a socially constructed part to gender. For example, gender roles have largely changed uh, through time, and they are different in many different societies. An example I like to use is that the Plains Indians, like the Lakota and Blackfoot, as well as Mongolian culture, um, notice that the similarity here is that these are both very nomadic cultures. In these societies, it is women who are the primary constructors of houses and buildings. And I'm not quite sure, I don't remember why this is, but this is actually very common um, in a lot of nomadic cultures, that women are the ones that would construct and maintain and repair buildings. Whereas today in Western society, we largely tend to think of construction and home repair as a more masculine activity. Um, I really don't remember why this is. The point, though, is that gender roles are not always the same. Throughout cultures, there is a part that is socially constructed. It's not just outright determined. Uh, Another off-sided example is that blue used to be a more feminine color, red used to be a more masculine color uh, back in the day, whereas now we tend to think we tend to associate blues with more as being a more male-oriented color, and reds, especially lighter reds like pinks, with being a more feminine color. So there is certainly a part of gender that is socially constructed, that is that is just determined by humans. Um, but where the left just gets it wrong is then that it's not arbitrary. And I think this is maybe the most major point I have to make in all this. Um, the left the left makes this really curious and sort of major mistake. It's just an outright contradiction, um, or at least a performative contradiction, if not just an outright semantic contradiction. And that they'll go and say that gender roles are socially constructed, but then they treat gender roles as if they're individually constructed. And this is really weird to me. Okay, what do I mean by this? I mean, they have this correct observation that gender roles are at least in part something that societies construct. That gender roles are a little different from society to society. That societies form their gender roles differently. Um, there's of course similarities, but there is this observation um, that humans are playing a part in constructing gender roles. That they're not fixed, eternal, Platonic forms. And to me, that's a correct observation. That's a correct description of what's going on. But we're the left. But the way the left acts is then as if it's like totally individually constructed. That you're allowed to just completely define your gender and your gender role however you personally want. And that's kind of weird. That's not, because that's not the same thing. Like if gender is socially constructed, that means the rest of us get a say, and that means no, you don't get to be a Z or Zure. You see what I'm saying? Like most of the rest of society has not agreed to that, and so it's not to be able to say that everyone gets to determine what gender they are means that it's individually constructed. That means you're individually defining your gender and your gender role for yourself, and that means it's not socially constructed. These are two different things. If it's socially constructed, the rest of us get a say. That's that's just the way that's what it means for something to be socially constructed. So I think this is like the major reason why the left wing is very wrong. I think it's correct to say that there is a socially constructed component, but it's totally incorrect to say that it's individually constructed, that you just get to individually determine gender and gender roles and all of that. Um, no, that's something different. That's something altogether different. Okay, so let's move on to the right wing. This one's going to be a little more difficult. Um, what the right does, and I'm really I really feel like I'm in danger of strawmanning the right here. I have to be careful. What the right does is it treats gender as if it's some kind of rigid, eternal, unchanging Platonic form. Now, what do I mean by that? What's a Platonic form? Well, a Platonic form is a concept that obviously comes from the philosopher Plato. Now, Plato, his biggest concern and probably the most influential idea in all of philosophy ever is the idea of forms. And it's a really hard concept um, to really convey, because it's so odd, I think, to the modern mind, since we've moved on into very different ideas about abstract concepts. What a Platonic form is the uh, solidification of an abstract idea. I like to use the idea of cats, of catness. I'm going to go ahead and use the idea of the essence of catness, even though the idea of an essence is much more aligned with the philosopher Aristotle. Um, in fact, his point of view on this subject is literally called essentialism. But keeping that in mind, I'm gonna just for the sake of trying to explain it in a way that I think makes sense to a modern English speaker, uh, I'm gonna use the word essence. A Platonic form is the essence of that thing. So it's like the essence of what it means to be a cat. Like all cats share in the form of a cat. Now, the difference between Aristotle and Plato is that Aristotle thought the essence of a cat existed inside the cat itself. Each individual cat carried this essence of catness. I mean, it was the same essence from a tiger to a house cat, uh, but it lived inside of the creature. Plato believed that the form, the form of a cat, actually lived on another plane of existence. And it was from this plane of existence that the form of a cat, the essence of catness, would beam itself into our world. And that every individual cat that you saw, again, whether it was house cat, tiger, lion, every individual cat was then sort of a shadow, like the shadow of the perfect form of catness. It's an odd idea. I really think it's an odd idea to the modern mind. Now, an important part of this theory is that Plato thought that like our eyes see this world, our ears, hear this world, um, but what our mind does is it sees or hears the the world of the forms. So when we envision something, we are seeing a form. When we hear something, we're hearing, what a form would sound like. like that's what our minds do, is our minds are capable of reaching into the world of forms. Now Plato also, he, I'm kind of misstating this. It's not that we every thought we have is looking at a form. It takes to Plato. It took a lot of practice, a lot of uh, it took a philosopher to really see a form just as it is in its perfect essence, I guess you could say. But the important part is that our minds are sort of the organ for reaching into the world of the forms. And it's the world of the forms that contained the abstract idea, the universalization of what it means to be a cat, what it means to be an elephant, what it means to be a table or chair, or even very abstract ideas like justice. There was a form of justice that lived in Plato's heaven. So this is what it means for something to be a Platonic form. Now, uh, the difference that we don't really think about this the same way nowadays because of mostly because of a man named William of Ockham, but then later on because of the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who really expounded on these ideas even further. But what Occam did is he took Platonism, which dominated philosophy for like 1800 years, like a long, long time. Philosophers were Platonists and Neoplatonists. But Occam came by and basically demolished all this and uh, basically, I don't want to just say outright debunked. There's still philosophers today who hold on to some form of Platonism. Mathematicians and the Eastern Orthodox Church are particularly fond of Platonism. They still try to defend it. But uh, most philosophers, most thinking people don't really think in this way anymore. They think in terms of some form of nominalism. Now, nominalism has a very specific connotation in today's philosophical world, which means that these abstract ideas are just the products of language. But originally, this isn't quite what William of Ockham meant by it when he formed the school of nominalism. To him, nominalism was just the idea that only individual instances exist. So, like, you have this abstract idea of cats, um, that's supposed to, you know, be common to all cats, but really only the individual cats exist. And the idea is just a convenience of language. Like we notice the similarities between all, this cat, that cat, and we just come up with a word that captures them all. And there's something to that idea, most assuredly. And I'm not going to examine it super close. Um, uh, Instead, I'm going to explain conceptualism. Conceptualism was kind of a further development, maybe an earlier development, because I believe Peter Abelard preceded Occam and was a conceptualist himself. And it's not always clear to the scholars whether Occam was a nominalist or conceptualist, as in how we define these terms today. But Immanuel Kant certainly was a conceptualist and is probably the most famous of their kin. Um, and conceptualism is just the idea that abstract ideas like catness or numbers or justice uh, certainly don't exist in like the same way that tables do, as like external objects, but they do exist in the mind. They're not Platonic forms that exist in another dimension. They're not Aristotelian essences that exist out in the world inside the objects. The abstract idea exists in the mind of each person. So that's what conceptualism is. Um, Now, that being said, I would go on a limb and say that the evidence for nominalism and conceptualism, which I'm gonna call these together like ontological anti-realism. There's a mouthful, right? Uh, I don't want you to confuse this with epistemological anti-realism. Epistemological realism is the idea that external objects like tables and chairs exist, like there is an external world, whereas epistemological anti-realism um, is the idea that tables and chairs, like an external world does not exist, or that we don't have enough proof to say that an external world exists. Ontological realism is different. It just has to do with abstract ideas, like you know cats as a whole set, or justice as just an idea. Goodness is a very abstract idea. What it means to be good is very abstract. Goodness and justice certainly do not exist out in the world in the same way um, that tables and chairs do. Like I can knock on the table here. I can't knock on a justice. you know. So when we refer to ontological realism, we're talking something like Plato or Aristotle, who believe that abstract ideas like the set of all cats or justice are real things in the same way that tables or chairs would be in epistemological realism. Whereas ontological anti-realism is going to be like the positions of nominalism and conceptualism, where it's no, these are not real things. And conceptualism is kind of weird, right? Because it does say that abstractions are real, they're just real in the mind. So I don't know if it's traditionally kind of associated with it being an anti-realist position, but it don't matter. Um, the point is you had Platonism for 1800 years, and then you had Occam come around and introduce nominalism. Kant further expanded upon it. Now, Kant is also very interesting because we are still living in a more or less Kantian age. Kant's biggest contribution is this idea that the mind is not just a passive observer. Like the idea of sort of bottom-up processing, which is what cognitive scientists would call it, has been an idea throughout history. Like Plato and Aristotle really truly believed that the mind was just taking in information. So when you saw a cat, you are like the idea of catness was for Aristotle, let's say, was contained in the cat. So the abstract idea of catness was something external to you. The mind, the idea of catness, that it's a mental object, was being received. Like this idea was being received by the mind. Kant came around, and he like his biggest contribution is to say, no, the mind is not just a passive observer. The mind does not just take in information like this. The mind also imposes information upon what we see and hear and take in with our senses. Today, cognitive scientists call the things that the mind imposes schemas. And all a schema is a sort of prior idea. It's almost synonymous with the idea of a form or an essence. And I mean, it's not perfectly. It's very comparable. It's very comparable to these ideas. And basically all it is our preconceived notions of something. So you have a preconceived notion. You have a schema of what a cat is. It's got four legs. It's a mammal. It has claws. It's usually predatory, often nocturnal, fur. You have this idea of what a cat is, and when you go in and you sense the world, you go and look in the world, you are imposing your schemas onto what you see just as much as you're taking in new information to alter those schemas. Let me give an example. So let's say there's a cat around the corner, okay? But only like the tip of its ear is showing. And you're maybe at like a distance, looking at the corner. You can't see the cat. You can only see like the tip of its ear. From a distance, you might kind of look at it like, what is that? Is it like maybe the wing of an insect? Is it the tip of a dog's tail? Is it like what is it? You have a hard time telling what it is from a distance because you can only see like the tip of the ear. And notice what I did there, because this is kind of what the mind does. I asked, is that the wing of an insect? Is that maybe the tip of a dog's tail? What the mind does is it takes all these previous schemas that it has stored up, insect's wing and dog's tail. And it tries to match these schemas to what it's seeing. And if you're familiar at all with what modern AI does, like modern uh, uh, visual processing in AI, this is what the AI is doing too. It's like it has the AI has a previous schema, like it's programmed to have an idea, or I should say trained. It's trained to have an idea of of what an insect's wing looks like, what a dog's tail looks like, and it tries to do the same thing. It has like a mental Rolodex, and it tries to match what it's seeing with a schema. So obviously, what's going on when you're just seeing like the tip of the cat's ear and trying to determine what it is, you're imposing your ideas onto what you see just as much as you're looking and observing and trying to take in more information. It's both. You're doing both things. This was Kant's major contribution. Um, and by the way, when the cat finally steps around the corner and reveals itself, um, it like it's much easier. You have a lot more information now. You match it instantly with the schema of a cat and go, oh, it was a cat. Well, Kant's major contribution and why I still say we're living in a Kantian age of philosophy and really of all the cognitive sciences is that we still have a very Kantian uh, model of how the mind works. And it's really what I just explained to you, that the mind is just as much an active processor that is projecting its ideas onto what it sees in order to process information. And it's not just in identifying objects. Like there's multiple layers to this. It's very complex. But like before Kant, no one did this. Before Kant, people really thought, more like Plato and Aristotle, that the mind is just a passive observer. That the essence is that the mind is getting its ideas passively from the world. With Aristotle, it was the essence of things was being passed to the mind, and that's how the mind got its forms. And for Plato, it was the forms are on a another plane of existence, and that's where we got our ideas of things. Now, in my last video, I really went through this with a lot more detail, and explained how it led to nihilism, because in a Platonic or Aristotelian worldview, an abstract idea like purpose or meaning is something that's just as objectively it exists just as objectively as a table or chair. So the idea that nihilism, which is that the meaning and purpose don't objectively exist, it's an impossibility in that system. It's an absurdity from the point of view of that system. Meaning and purpose is something that you can go out into the world and study and find just as much as you can a zebra or a fish. Just go out and just go out and view. Uh, Read a book on it, like the Bible, or the Pali Canon if you're in a Buddhist country, or whatever the equivalent of your culture is. Go read a book on your purpose. Go study other people that are like you. Maybe you're a peasant that works the field, so you go study other peasants, and you'll find your purpose just by studying it, like you would study a fish. If you wanted to learn more about fish, you go observe fish, or maybe dissect a fish, or whatever. So I examined that a lot more closely in my talking about nihilism on my 40th birthday video, and really how the transition from Platonism into more nominalist uh, positions has sort of allowed nihilism to pop up in our culture. It set the necessary conditions for it to happen. Not necessarily sufficient conditions. It took a while for nihilism to, become a legitimate position to hold, but it set the necessary conditions. Um, Now, okay, so why is all this relevant to gender? Well, I'm giving you all this because what the right wing tends to do, and again, I really want to be careful here because I'm in danger of strawmanning the right here. The right wants to treat gender as if it has this eternal Platonic form quality to it. That what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, is something that is this fixed, rigid idea that comes from outside of us. We just need to observe nature. We just need to, or maybe observe the Bible or some other religious text. Um, like it's something that comes from outside of us is the point. Bible, nature, wherever it is. And the right wants to confine gender to being only that. But that's not correct. Certainly not correct. If that was the case, then gender wouldn't change from culture to culture and it wouldn't change throughout time. It would be something more or less fixed. Um, the truth of the matter lies somewhere more in the middle. The left is actually correct when they say that gender is socially constructed, or I would say more accurately, it has a component that's socially constructed. It also does have a component that is from nature, from the physical nature of men and women being physically, biologically different. It does have that component as well. But trying to treat it as if it's some fixed thing that men are men, women are women, and men will always, be like this, women will always be like that. I don't think that's the case. There's definitely room for some flexibility in there. There's definitely a lot about gender roles that are human defined. Um, Now, there's a lot about gender roles that are pretty consistent from culture to culture too. Men are pretty much always the ones that go to war, for instance, that do the physical defense of the tribe or society or city or whatever it may be. Women, well, biologically, women are the ones that bear children, like period. Uh, Now we're coming to an age that we might have the technology to change some of that, but we're not quite there yet. Point is the point is I don't think the right wing is quite precisely correct in this either. It's not that gender is not socially constructed at all. That it's just one rigid fixed thing. It's not. I'm sorry, guys. It's just not. Uh, there's definitely differences. There's definitely room for flexibility in there, and and it's not a Platonic form. In fact, all knowledge is constructed. Yeah, all of it. All of it's constructed. This is another one that the right wing doesn't want to run with. There's a lot of effort right now, I think, where the right wing is trying to, and this goes among philosophers too that are not actually necessarily right wing, but um, so I guess I should maybe divorce this from being a necessarily right wing thing. But there are a lot of philosophers who are trying to return us to a more Aristotelian point of view, that they think the Kantian point of view on this is wrong. And they want to say that the essence of things, or that our ideas are something that that passively come to us from out in the world. I think this is clearly incorrect. I think the Kantian point of view has strongly borne out by the available evidence. Um, just the example I give of like seeing the tip of the cat's ear it's strong intuitive evidence, the Kantian position, that we're not just passively observing the world, that our minds are very active in determining what we see or what we think things are. It's both bottom up and top down processing. Is the are the terms that cognitive scientists would use. Um, I think going forward, I'm going to probably make a lot of videos. There's so much to cover when it comes to the debate on, um, the Aristotelian point of view of the mind versus the Kantian point of view of the mind. Um, Nominalism, realism, conceptualism. These are very interesting topics to me, so I'll probably be covering these a lot more. But for now, I think it's enough to say that the right wing that wants to uh, that wants to say that gender is something that completely comes from outside sources, that it's not human determined on any level. Apologies if I am strawmanning things a little bit here. Um, I think there's a lot of right wingers that really want to argue that exactly, actually, in full, that it's fully something that comes from somewhere else. Usually that would come from Christians, who try to say that gender roles come from God or come from the Bible, that sort of thing. So I think there are plenty of people like that. Um, I would think there's probably also a lot of right-wingers that recognize that, yeah, there probably are some human-determined parts. It's just a lot less than the left thinks it is, which I would probably agree with that position. So there you have it. I think the correct position in the end is that gender is socially constructed. It's socially constructed, but it is based. Uh, it is constructed around some organizing principles, and those organizing principles are largely not human constructed. That they come from somewhere else. Biology would be the main thing that I would point to when it comes to that. So I think that's the correct point of view. Gender is socially constructed, but not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. It has organizing principles that come outside of us. I think the right wing would do well to stop trying to impose um, this rigid view that gender is this fixed thing, because it's not. There is a social constructed component to it, and I think the left wing would do well to stop treating gender as if it's just completely arbitrary. It's individually constructed. Everyone gets to determine what their gender is and all that. That's obviously not the case either. Like the biological component is obviously very important. So that's what I think. Um, uh, I have spoken. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy these sorts of analyses, man, I think honestly think this one's a little light on the philosophy. I certainly explained some philosophical stuff, but I want to get into much more philosophy that's a little deeper, a little more difficult maybe. But I think on this topic, given that it has such a general interest, I'm not sure that getting too much deeper would be of interest to everyone. But I certainly want to do that for the rest of my channel. I definitely want to. Uh, uh, I definitely want to cover heavier philosophical topics. You know what? Something I totally forgot to mention. Knowledge is obviously constructed. Like, it used to be knowledge that Pluto was a planet. Now it's not, because we defined it different. Now it's knowledge that Pluto is a dwarf planet. And trust me, you want it to be like that. Because if it wasn't, you'd have to memorize like 30 more objects out in the Kuiper Belt that are basically just like Pluto. They're small, round dwarf planets. Trust me, it's simpler. It's simpler to just drop one than add 30. Another one is clades in biology. We used to organize biology very differently than we do now. Now we use clades because we organize biology based off of evolution and things like, for example, birds are now literally considered dinosaurs. Whereas before birds were kind of their own thing, but they're in the clade of, I think, the clade of Dinosauria. Uh, they're literally descended from theropod dinosaurs like T-Rex or Allosaurus. So knowledge changes over time. What we consider knowledge is something that does change as we learn more. So yeah, knowledge is definitely constructed. There's definitely a human component to it. But anyways, that's all I have for today. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe. I'm a new channel. I do these kinds of examinations. I do philosophy. Um, and if you like it, subscribe. Thank you.